The silence over Kandahar airfield was wrong. Dead wrong. At 3:47 hours on September 15, 2021, every F-22 Raptor on the flight line sat chained to the tarmac like caged predators, their sleek forms reflecting the amber glow of runway lights. The Pentagon had issued a fleet-wide grounding order after structural cracks were discovered in the aircraft's titanium frame, cracks that could turn a $40 million fighter into falling debris at Mach 2. But war doesn't pause for maintenance schedules. Staff Sergeant Kestrel Bones Vasquez stood in the pre-dawn darkness, her calloused fingers tracing the worn leather of her flight gloves. At 5'4", with prematurely gray streaks threading through her black hair, she looked nothing like the poster children who flew the Raptors. While they posed for recruitment videos, she'd been flying the unglamorous missions in her A-10 Thunderbolt II, a 30-year-old aircraft that most pilots considered a relic. The radio crackled to life in the ops center behind her. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Trident 6. We are taking heavy fire, requesting immediate CAS. Grid coordinates follow." Major Collins, the squadron commander, stared at the tactical display with the look of a man watching his worst nightmare unfold. 8 Navy SEALs were pinned down in the Spingar Mountains, 40 clicks northeast of Jalalabad. Taliban forces had surrounded their position during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. Without close air support, they had maybe 20 minutes before becoming statistics. "Sir," the communications officer's voice cracked slightly, "the F-22s are still grounded. F-16s are 2 hours out. The Apache gunships can't make it through that weather front." Collins ran his hand through his graying hair, studying the storm system that had rolled in from the Hindu Kush. Visibility near zero, winds gusting to 60 knots, with terrain that could tear aircraft apart even in perfect conditions. It was a death sentence for conventional fighters. "What about the Warthog?" someone suggested almost as a joke. Collins turned to see Bones standing in the doorway, her flight suit already zipped, helmet tucked under her arm. The room fell silent. They called her aircraft the Warthog for good reason. It was ugly, slow, and built like a flying tank. In an age of stealth fighters and precision munitions, the A-10 was an anachronism. But Bones had kept it flying through 3 deployments, bringing pilots home when prettier aircraft would have become smoking craters. "You can't be serious," Lieutenant Morrison scoffed. "That thing's older than some of the guys it's supposed to protect." Bones met his gaze steadily. "Those SEALs don't care how old my bird is, Lieutenant. They care whether I can reach them." She looked at Collins. "Sir, I can fly low under the weather. The Warthog was built for this." Collins stared at the tactical display, watching the red icons closing on Trident 6's position. Time was bleeding away like hydraulic fluid from a damaged line. Every second of hesitation brought those men closer to a fight they couldn't win. The radio crackled again, more urgent now. "Trident 6 to any station. We are being overrun. Request immediate assistance. We are running low on ammunition and have wounded. Please advise." The desperation in the SEAL team leader's voice cut through the operations center like shrapnel. These weren't just coordinates on a map. They were fathers, sons, brothers who'd volunteered for a mission that had gone sideways in the worst possible way. Collins looked at Bones, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him why she'd earned her call sign. They'd named her Bones after her first deployment, when she'd brought back an A-10 so shot up that maintenance crews swore it was held together by prayer and duct tape. The aircraft had taken direct hits from RPGs and small arms fire, losing hydraulics, with one engine spooled down to idle. Any sane pilot would have ejected over friendly territory. Instead, she'd nursed it home, landing gear up, on a foam-covered runway at Bagram. When they pulled her from the cockpit, she'd calmly handed her helmet to the crew chief and asked, "When can I get another bird?" Now, 3 years later, she stood ready to do it again. Collins made his decision: get her pre-flighted and airborne fast. The operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Weather officers pulled updated forecasts, intelligence analysts refined target coordinates, and ordnance crews began loading Bones' aircraft with 30mm ammunition and Maverick missiles. Through it all, Bones remained calm, methodically reviewing terrain maps and radio frequencies. "You realize this is probably suicide," Morrison said, approaching her workstation. Bones looked up from her charts. "Probably, but those SEALs signed up for the same job I did. Nobody gets left behind." Outside, her A-10 sat on the flight line like a gray ghost against the pre-dawn sky. The Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II was never going to win beauty contests. Its twin engines mounted high on the fuselage gave it an awkward, ungainly appearance. The massive GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruding from its nose made it look more like a flying gun than an aircraft. But Bones loved everything about it. The titanium bathtub that surrounded the cockpit, the redundant flight controls, the straight wings designed for low and slow operations. It was built to take punishment and keep flying. As she walked her pre-flight inspection, checking control surfaces and weapons pylons, Bones thought about the 8 men waiting for her in those mountains. She didn't know their names or faces, but she knew their situation intimately. In Afghanistan, everyone eventually found themselves in that position, outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. The difference was, some people had someone coming for them. The weather briefing was grim, ceiling at 300 feet with visibility less than half a mile, mountain peaks shrouded in clouds and precipitation, surface winds variable at 40 to 60 knots with severe turbulence reported. Commercial airlines would have grounded their fleets. Even military helicopters were staying on the ground. But the A-10 wasn't built for comfort or convenience. It was built to fly in conditions that would kill other aircraft, delivering devastating firepower with surgical precision. Bones had done it before, threading the needle between mountain peaks in weather that would make seasoned pilots pray. The key was flying low, so low that radar couldn't track you, so low that infrared missiles couldn't lock on, so low that you became part of the landscape itself. It was dangerous, demanding perfect situational awareness and reflexes honed by thousands of hours in the cockpit. One moment of inattention, one miscalculation, and you'd become another crater in the Afghan countryside. As she strapped into the ejection seat, Bones ran through her mental checklist one final time. Engine start procedures, weapon system checks, emergency procedures. The familiar ritual calmed her mind, focusing her attention on the task ahead. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, turbofan blades creating the thrust that would carry her into the storm. Tower cleared her for immediate departure on runway 27. No delays, no questions. Just a simple acknowledgement that she was their last, best hope for bringing those SEALs home alive. As the A-10 rolled down the runway, gathering speed, Bones felt the familiar sensation of leaving solid ground behind. The landing gear retracted with mechanical precision, and suddenly she was airborne, climbing into the dark sky above Afghanistan. Below, the lights of Kandahar airfield fell away. Ahead lay mountains, weather, and 8 men who needed her more than they'd ever needed anyone. The storm hit her 15 minutes after takeoff. Turbulence slammed the A-10 like invisible fists, jarring her against the harness straps despite the aircraft's legendary stability. Rain lashed the canopy, reducing visibility to mere yards. Lightning flickered through the clouds, creating brief, otherworldly glimpses of the terrain below. Bones flew on instruments, trusting the aircraft systems more than her own eyes. The radar altimeter showed terrain rushing past just hundreds of feet below. Too low for safety, too high to avoid detection. She needed to find that sweet spot where the A-10 could survive and deliver its payload effectively. Trident 6, this is Bones, inbound your position. ETA 15 minutes. What's your situation? Over. The response came through static and interference. Bones, Trident 6. We are surrounded and taking heavy fire from multiple positions. We have 2 wounded, including our medic. Ammunition running critically low. Enemy strength estimated at 40 to 50 fighters with RPGs and heavy machine guns. 50 fighters against 8 SEALs with limited ammunition and no heavy weapons. The math was ugly, but Bones had faced worse odds before. In 2019, she'd engaged an entire Taliban compound single-handedly, breaking up an attack on a forward operating base. The key was using the A-10's strengths, its ability to loiter over the battlefield, its precision weapon systems, and the psychological effect of that massive cannon. Copy Trident 6. Maintain your position and mark your location with IR strobes if possible. I'm coming in low from the south. The mountains rose around her like sleeping giants, their peaks lost in the storm clouds. Navigation was a constant challenge, cross-referencing GPS coordinates with terrain features that appeared and disappeared in the swirling precipitation. One wrong turn, one moment of spatial disorientation, and she'd fly straight into a mountainside at 250 knots. But the A-10 kept flying, its engines maintaining power even as ice began forming on the leading edges of the wings. The aircraft's de-icing systems worked overtime, keeping critical surfaces clear. This was exactly the kind of mission the Warthog was designed for: low-level penetration in adverse weather, delivering close air support to ground forces in contact. As she approached the target area, Bones switched her radio to the emergency frequency. Any station, this is Bones. I am approaching grid coordinates for Trident 6, requesting immediate deconfliction and target briefing. The response came from an Air Force combat controller embedded with the SEAL team. Bones, this is Sabre 17. Thank God you're here. Trident 6 is pinned down in a valley approximately 5 clicks northeast of your current position. Enemy forces occupy high ground on 3 sides, with heavy weapons positions at the following coordinates. Bones quickly plotted the positions on her tactical display, her mind already working out attack angles and escape routes. The terrain was challenging, narrow valley floors surrounded by steep ridges that would limit her maneuvering room. She'd have 1, maybe 2 chances to neutralize the threat before enemy fire forced her to break contact. The radio crackled again. Bones, be advised enemy forces have shoulder-fired missiles. Recommend extreme caution on your attack runs. Surface-to-air missiles changed everything. The A-10's survivability depended on its ability to absorb damage and keep flying, but even the Warthog couldn't survive a direct hit from a modern SAM. She'd need to use terrain masking, pop-up attacks, and every evasive maneuver in the book. Through the rain and clouds, she caught her first glimpse of the battlefield. Muzzle flashes sparkled like deadly fireflies along the ridge lines, converging on a small cluster of rocks where the SEALs had taken cover. Tracer rounds painted lazy arcs through the darkness, illuminating the intensity of the firefight below. 8 men against 50. The odds were impossible, but Bones had never been one to respect mathematical probability. She armed her weapons systems and began her descent toward the valley floor, where thunder and lightning would soon have company from a different kind of storm altogether. The first attack run was a lesson in controlled violence. Bones dove the A-10 through the cloud layer, breaking into clear air just 500 feet above the valley floor. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon spooled up with its distinctive sound, like tearing canvas amplified 1,000 times. 7 barrels rotating at 4,000 rounds per minute, each projectile capable of penetrating armored vehicles. She walked the cannon fire across the eastern ridge line, where Taliban fighters had established their primary position. The 30mm depleted uranium rounds struck with devastating effect, turning rocks into dust and men into memories. The psychological impact was immediate. The volume of return fire dropped noticeably as surviving fighters sought deeper cover. Good effects on target, Sabre 17 reported. Eastern ridge neutralized, western position still active with heavy weapons. Bones pulled the A-10 into a climbing turn, using the terrain to mask her next approach. The aircraft shuddered as machine gun bullets found their mark, punching holes in the wing surfaces. Warning lights illuminated her instrument panel, but all critical systems remained operational. This was what the Warthog was built for, absorbing punishment that would destroy other aircraft. Her second pass targeted the western ridge, where enemy fighters had concentrated their heaviest weapons. She selected a Maverick missile, its infrared seeker head locking onto the heat signature of a heavy machine gun position. The missile streaked away from the aircraft, trailing fire through the rain-soaked air. The explosion was visible even through the storm clouds, a brilliant flash followed by secondary detonations as stored ammunition cooked off. Another Taliban position eliminated, but more remained. The enemy was well entrenched, disciplined, and determined to eliminate the American Special Operations Team. "Bones, this is Trident 6 Actual," a new voice came over the radio. The SEAL team leader sounded exhausted but determined. "We've got movement on the northern approach. Looks like they're trying to flank our position." Bones checked her fuel state and ammunition count. Still plenty of both, but the weather was deteriorating rapidly. Ice was forming on her aircraft despite the de-icing systems, and visibility was dropping to dangerous levels. She needed to end this fight quickly, before conditions became impossible even for the hardy A-10. Her third attack run came from an unexpected angle, directly up the valley floor at terrain-following altitude. The Taliban fighters were positioned to defend against attacks from above, not from an aircraft flying 50 feet off the deck at 200 knots. By the time they realized what was happening, the A-10 was already among them. Bones triggered the cannon in short, precise bursts, engaging individual positions with surgical accuracy. The aircraft bucked with each firing sequence, but remained steady on course. Behind her, the valley erupted in chaos as 30mm rounds found their targets with devastating precision. "Outstanding work, Bones," Sabre 17 called out. "Northern approach is clear. You've given us breathing room to move wounded and resupply ammunition." But the respite was temporary. Intelligence reports indicated additional Taliban forces were moving toward the valley from multiple directions, drawn by the sounds of combat. What had started as an ambush was escalating into a major engagement, with reinforcements arriving hourly. Bones orbited above the battlefield, her aircraft serving as both weapon platform and psychological deterrent. The distinctive sound of the A-10's engines, a low, ominous rumble that earned the aircraft its nickname Warthog, had become synonymous with American air power. Taliban fighters knew that sound meant death was circling overhead, waiting to strike. The radio brought fresh intelligence updates every few minutes. Enemy reinforcements approaching from the east, possible vehicle movement detected on thermal imaging, reports of additional heavy weapons being moved into position. The tactical situation was fluid and dangerous, requiring constant adaptation. As dawn approached, the weather began to clear slightly. Visibility improved to nearly a mile, and the ceiling lifted to 800 feet. For the first time since beginning her mission, Bones could see the broader tactical picture. The valley was larger than she'd realized, with multiple approaches that enemy forces could exploit. More concerning was her fuel state. The A-10 was efficient, but not infinite. Prolonged combat operations at low altitude consumed fuel rapidly, and she was approaching the point where she'd need to consider returning to base. The thought of abandoning those SEALs was unacceptable, but an aircraft without fuel couldn't help anyone. She made a decision that would define her legacy in military aviation. Instead of departing for fuel, Bones requested an aerial refueling tanker. It was an unusual request. A-10s typically refueled at forward operating bases rather than in flight. but the KC-135 Stratotanker could extend her mission duration indefinitely, allowing her to maintain protective coverage over Trident 6 until ground reinforcements arrived. Negative on the tanker, came the response from command. Weather conditions prohibit safe refueling operations in your area. Bones looked at her fuel gauge, then at the tactical display showing enemy forces converging on the SEAL's position. Mathematics versus morality. Regulations versus reality. She keyed her microphone with the calmness of someone who'd already made an impossible choice. Roger, command. Bones will remain on station. Below her, 8 American warriors waited for rescue that might never come, trusting their lives to a pilot flying an aircraft older than some of them were. Above her, storm clouds gathered like harbingers of the decision that would echo through military history. The fuel gauge continued its inexorable countdown toward empty, but Bones wasn't going anywhere. By full daylight, the tactical situation had become desperate. Bones had been airborne for 6 hours, far exceeding the A-10's normal mission duration. Her fuel state was critically low, 20 minutes of flight time remaining at current consumption rates. Enemy reinforcements continued arriving, turning what should have been a quick extraction into a prolonged siege. The SEALs had managed to establish a more defensible position in a cluster of rocks near the valley floor, but they were still outnumbered 10-1. Their ammunition situation was critical, with only a few magazines remaining per man. The wounded medic had lost consciousness, and without proper medical evacuation, he might not survive another hour. Bones, this is Overlord, the voice of General Morrison crackled through her headset. You are ordered to return to base immediately for refueling. Ground reinforcements will be dispatched to extract Trident 6. Bones checked her tactical display. The nearest friendly ground forces were 4 hours away, crossing terrain that Taliban forces knew intimately. Even with helicopter support, which wasn't available due to weather conditions, the extraction team would arrive too late. Sir, Trident 6 won't survive 4 hours. They need immediate extraction or continued air support. Staff Sergeant, you have your orders. RTB immediately. The radio fell silent. Around her, the A-10's engines continued their steady rumble, burning precious fuel with each passing second. Below, muzzle flashes marked renewed enemy contact as Taliban forces probed the SEAL's defensive perimeter. The mathematics were simple and brutal. Without air support, those men would be overrun within the hour. Bones made the decision that would define her career and her conscience. Overlord, this is Bones, unable to comply with RTB order due to technical difficulties, remaining on station to provide cover for Trident 6. It was career suicide. Disobeying direct orders from a general officer was a court-martial offense, potentially resulting in dismissal from service and criminal charges. But as she watched tracer rounds converging on the SEAL's position, the consequences seemed less important than the principle. Nobody gets left behind. She dove the A-10 back into the fight, her cannon painting deadly arcs across enemy positions. With fuel critically low, every pass had to count. There would be no margin for error, no opportunity for second chances. When her fuel ran out, she'd have perhaps 5 minutes to find a suitable emergency landing site, if one existed in this mountainous terrain. The Taliban forces had learned to fear the sound of her engines. When the A-10 appeared overhead, fighters dove for cover, disrupting their attacks on the SEAL position. It was psychological warfare combined with devastating firepower, the kind of close air support that had made the Warthog legendary among ground forces. Bones, you beautiful crazy pilot, Sabre 17 called out after another successful gun run. You just bought us another hour. An hour might be enough. Intelligence reports indicated that Marine Corps helicopters were launching from forward operating Base Chapman, attempting to reach the battlefield despite marginal weather conditions. If they could hold out just a little longer, extraction might be possible. But Bones' fuel gauge showed a different timeline. 15 minutes of flight time remaining. Not enough to reach Kandahar airfield, barely enough to clear the immediate mountain range. She began scanning for possible emergency landing sites, knowing that any forced landing in Taliban territory would likely be fatal. The radio crackled with an unexpected transmission. Bones, this is Rescue 24. Flight of 2 Marine Super Stallions inbound your position. ETA 25 minutes. 25 minutes. She had 15 minutes of fuel remaining. The mathematics were impossible, but mathematics had never stopped her before. Rescue 24. Be advised I am critically low on fuel. Will attempt to maintain air cover until your arrival, but aircraft may be unavailable for final extraction phase. What she didn't say was that she planned to fly until the engines quit, then eject over enemy territory. It would give the SEALs their best chance at survival, even if it meant her own capture or death. Some calculations transcended personal safety. The Taliban forces seemed to sense that time was running out. Their attacks intensified, with coordinated assaults from multiple directions. RPGs streaked through the air, and heavy machine gun fire created deadly crossfire zones. The SEALs fought back with precision born of desperation, making every shot count. Bones worked her aircraft like a surgeon's scalpel, engaging individual targets with minimal ammunition expenditure. Each burst of cannon fire was calculated for maximum effect, conserving rounds for the critical moments ahead. The A-10 responded to her commands with the familiarity of a trusted partner, both pilot and aircraft pushing beyond normal operational limits. With 10 minutes of fuel remaining, she made her final attack run. The last gun run was poetry written in smoke and thunder. Bones lined up on a concentration of enemy fighters who had moved dangerously close to the SEALs' perimeter, close enough for a final assault that might overwhelm the Americans' defenses. The A-10 dove through moderate anti-aircraft fire, tracers reaching up like deadly fingers trying to swat her from the sky. She held her fire until the last possible second, waiting for the perfect firing solution. At 300 meters range, she triggered the GAU-8 cannon in one continuous burst, walking the rounds across the enemy position with mechanical precision. The 30mm depleted uranium projectile struck with sledgehammer impact, eliminating the immediate threat to Trident 6. But the victory came at a price. As she pulled up from the attack run, multiple warning lights illuminated her instrument panel. Engine number 2 was running rough, possibly damaged by ground fire. Fuel quantity was showing less than 5 minutes remaining, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the morning air. Bones, this is Rescue 24. We have you in sight and are beginning our approach to the LZ. Outstanding work down there. She looked at her fuel gauge one more time. 3 minutes. Maybe 4 if she leaned the mixture and reduced power settings. Not enough to reach safety, but enough to see the job finished. The Marine helicopters swept into the valley like mechanical angels, their door gunners already engaging remaining Taliban positions. Trident 6, this is Rescue 24. Prepare for immediate extraction. Load wounded first. Through her canopy, Bones watched the rescue unfold. The SEALs moved with practiced efficiency despite their exhaustion, loading their wounded comrade aboard the first helicopter while maintaining security for the landing zone. In minutes, all 8 men were aboard the Marine aircraft, lifted away from certain death by rotors and turbines and the courage of their fellow warriors. Her fuel gauge showed empty. Engine number 2 flamed out first, its compressor seizing with a grinding metallic scream. The A-10 shuddered but continued flying on its remaining engine, testimony to the aircraft's robust design. Bones began looking for emergency landing options, knowing that even a successful forced landing in this terrain would likely be unsurvivable. Engine number 1 began running rough, starved of fuel and pushing beyond its design limits. She had maybe 2 minutes of flight time remaining before complete power loss. Not enough to clear the mountain range, definitely not enough to reach friendly territory. But 8 American warriors were flying toward safety, their lives purchased with aviation fuel and determination. The radio crackled one final time. "Bones, this is Rescue 24 Actual. All packages secured and heading home. You did good today, pilot, real good." As her engines finally quit and the A-10 began its final descent toward the Afghan mountains, Staff Sergeant Kestrel Bones Vasquez smiled. In the sudden silence of powerless flight, surrounded by peaks that had witnessed centuries of warfare, she found a moment of perfect peace. She'd kept the promise that every pilot makes to every ground soldier. Nobody gets left behind. But the story of Bones wasn't finished. As her powerless A-10 glided toward the mountainous terrain, she spotted something that intelligence reports had missed: a relatively flat section of valley floor, perhaps 500 meters long, covered with loose gravel rather than solid rock. It wasn't much, but it was enough. With all the skill accumulated over 15 years of military flying, she lined up for a dead-stick landing that would either save her life or end it spectacularly. No engines, no hydraulic power, no second chances. Just pilot training, aircraft engineering, and the kind of luck that favors those who have already given everything for others. The A-10 touched down hard, its landing gear absorbing tremendous impact loads as it decelerated across the improvised runway. Gravel and dust exploded around the aircraft as it slid to a stop just meters from a cliff edge that would have meant certain death. For several long seconds, Bones sat motionless in her cockpit, hardly believing she was still alive. The aircraft was a total loss, engines destroyed, landing gear collapsed, structural damage throughout. But she was breathing, uninjured, and still in possession of her survival radio. Any station, this is Bones. I am down but okay at the following coordinates." The response was immediate. "Bones, this is Rescue 24. We are returning for pickup. Maintain your position and prepare for extraction." 20 minutes later, she was aboard the Marine helicopter, watching her destroyed A-10 disappear behind mountain peaks. The aircraft that had served her so faithfully was gone, but the 8 men she'd saved were headed home to their families. It seemed like a fair trade. The aftermath came swiftly and predictably. General Morrison was waiting when she landed at Kandahar Airfield, his face a mask of controlled fury. Disobeying direct orders was serious business, regardless of the outcome. Military discipline couldn't survive if every pilot decided for themselves which orders to follow. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, you will report to my office immediately." Morrison's voice cut through the noise of the flight line. But before she could respond, Master Sergeant Williams approached from the operations center, a communication message in his hand. "Sir, priority message from the Pentagon. The Secretary of Defense wants to speak with Staff Sergeant Vasquez immediately." Morrison's expression shifted from anger to confusion. Pentagon involvement meant this situation had attracted attention at the highest levels of command. That could be very good or very bad for Bones' career prospects. The phone call lasted 37 minutes. When it ended, General Morrison looked at Bones with something approaching respect mixed with bewilderment. The Secretary of Defense had personally intervened, not to punish her for disobedience, but to commend her for extraordinary heroism. The 8 SEALs she'd saved included 2 Medal of Honor recipients and a Navy Cross recipient. Their intelligence mission had uncovered critical information about Taliban leadership that would save hundreds of American lives. The value of preserving their lives transcended normal military calculations. "It appears, Staff Sergeant, that your insubordination has been retroactively classified as initiative," Morrison said with something that might have been a smile. "Congratulations. You've been selected for immediate promotion to Technical Sergeant and recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. But the real recognition came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks later, she received a package with no return address. Inside was a simple wooden box containing 8 dog tags, not the metal identification tags worn by military personnel, but wooden replicas carved by hand. Each bore the name of a SEAL from Trident 6, along with a single word: "Thanks." The note was unsigned but clear: "Nobody gets left behind. Semper Fi." Technical Sergeant Kestrel Bones Vasquez never flew combat missions again. The incident had elevated her profile beyond what was practical for frontline operations. Instead, she was assigned to the Air Force's premier test pilot school, where her experience with emergency procedures and aircraft limitations made her invaluable for evaluating new systems. But her legend lived on in ready rooms and briefing facilities throughout the Air Force. Young pilots heard the story of the A-10 pilot who disobeyed orders to save 8 SEALs, who'd flown a powerless aircraft through a dead-stick landing that should have been impossible. More importantly, maintenance crews started paying extra attention to the A-10 fleet. The aircraft that had saved Bones and allowed her to complete her mission became symbols of American engineering and determination. Instead of being retired as obsolete, the Warthogs received upgraded systems and extended service life. In the margins of military history, where individual actions intersect with broader strategic outcomes, Staff Sergeant Bones had changed the trajectory of an entire aircraft program. The A-10 would fly for decades more, providing close air support to ground forces who needed someone watching over them. The wooden dog tag sat on her desk throughout her remaining military career, a reminder that some decisions transcend rank and regulation. When young pilots visited her office and asked about the decorations on her wall, she'd tell them about a morning in Afghanistan when 8 men needed someone to come get them. And someone did. 5 years later, Technical Sergeant Vasquez retired from active duty and accepted a position with an aerospace contractor, developing next-generation close air support aircraft. Her first assignment was leading the design team for the A-10's eventual replacement, an aircraft that would incorporate lessons learned from decades of combat operations. The new aircraft would be faster, stealthier, and more technologically advanced than the Warthog. But the design requirements specifically called for the same characteristics that had made Bones' mission possible: survivability, loiterability, and the ability to operate from damaged runways in adverse weather conditions. During the design reviews, she insisted on one particular feature that other engineers considered unnecessary. The new aircraft would have extended fuel capacity and the capability for aerial refueling in adverse weather conditions. No pilot should ever have to choose between following orders and saving lives due to fuel limitations. The engineers nodded and incorporated her requirements into the specifications. They didn't argue with someone who'd proven the value of those capabilities under combat conditions. On her final day at the test facility, Bones walked out to the flight line where a pristine A-10 sat waiting for another pilot to take it into harm's way. She ran her hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal that had protected so many pilots through so many dangerous missions. The aircraft looked exactly like the one she destroyed in those Afghan mountains, but she knew better. Every A-10 was unique, shaped by its experiences and the pilots who'd flown it. This one hadn't earned its scars yet, hadn't proven itself in combat, hadn't faced the test that separated good aircraft from legendary ones. But it would. Somewhere, sometime, another pilot would climb into that cockpit and make the same promise she'd made: nobody gets left behind. 20 years after the incident, retired Master Sergeant Kestrel Vasquez received an invitation to speak at the Air Force Academy. The topic was military ethics and decision-making under pressure. As she looked out at the faces of future pilots and officers, she saw the same uncertainty and determination that had motivated her own career. Leadership, she told them, isn't about rank or authority. It's about making decisions that you can live with, even when those decisions might end your career. She paused, looking at the wooden dog tags that she still carried in her briefcase. Sometimes the most important orders you'll receive won't come from your commanding officer. They'll come from the people counting on you to do the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. A cadet in the front row raised his hand. "Ma'am, what if the right thing and the legal thing are different?" Bones smiled, remembering a similar question she'd asked herself in a valley in Afghanistan, with enemy forces closing in and fuel running low. Then you'd better be prepared to live with the consequences of whichever choice you make, because someone else will have to live with those consequences too. After her presentation, she walked across the academy grounds to the Memorial Plaza, where names of Air Force personnel killed in combat were inscribed in black granite. Among them was Staff Sergeant Michael "Sabre" Johnson, the combat controller who'd helped coordinate her attacks that morning in Afghanistan. He'd been killed 6 months after the Trident 6 rescue, directing air strikes during another Taliban engagement. His final radio transmission had been, "Keep 'em coming, Bones is on the way," even though she'd already rotated back to the United States by then. The tradition had continued. Throughout Afghanistan and later conflicts, pilots approaching dangerous close air support missions would hear those words from forward air controllers. "Bones is on the way." It had become military slang for help is coming, regardless of which pilot was actually flying the mission. Standing before Sabre's name on the memorial wall, Bones understood that legends aren't built on single moments of heroism. They're constructed from the accumulated actions of people who choose to do the right thing, again and again, even when nobody's watching. Especially when nobody's watching. As the sun set behind the Colorado mountains, casting long shadows across the academy grounds, retired Master Sergeant Kestrel Bones Vasquez walked toward her car. Tomorrow she would return to civilian life, to consultant work and conference presentations, and all the ordinary activities of retirement. But tonight, she was still the pilot who'd saved 8 men in a valley in Afghanistan, who'd proven that sometimes disobeying orders is the most military thing you can do. The wooden dog tags clicked softly in her briefcase as she walked, a rhythm like helicopter rotors carrying warriors home from war. The legend of Bones lived on in ready rooms and briefing facilities, passed down from